transcendent knowledge. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination, and at the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the 5 skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita? Addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said to Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita should see in this way, seeing the 5 skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form, emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics. There is no birth and no cessation. There is no impurity and no purity. There is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no I dhatu up to no mind dhatu, dhatu of dharmas, no mind consciousness dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the bodhisattvas have no attainment, abide by means of Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. They transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the 3 times by means of Prajnaparamita fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering should be known as truth, since there is no deception. The Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way: Teata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangati Bodhisoha. Thus, Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Chandara Samaraya Medeyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangati Bodhisoha Baba Gonju Zanji Medoji Sheo Bodoji Medoji Sheo Doji Ragi Baji Medumbe Judanji Jedin Koryezo Ngere Donya Jejo Jewada Medo Nube Yena Jewada Domba Junji Munzun Zunyoji Naji De Jan and The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas high, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds of knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples as we are ready, a shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. Idam Guru Radhamandala Niradayami. Jadan Zaji Janam La Janju Badu Dani Yazuchi Dagi Chunye Jibe Zunami Jola Benji Zanye Rubasho Jadan Zaji Janam La Janju Badu Dani Yazuchi Dagi Chunye Jibe Zunami Jola Benji Zanye Rubasho Jadan Zaji Janam La Yanjo Bado Dani Yazuji Nagi Chinye Jibe Zonamji Drola Benji Zanji Rubayu.
Danga zo la no ten man ka shu gar ta ma je ta wa shin de bi ju ten lo ju da jan re ba ni ten lo ju da jan re ba la ta yi ten la chi bu la bi ju ko ni bu je da la bi ju ni bu je da la bi ju la chi bu chung wo da to mo la ji lo jan bi ju dan ding da to mo la ji lo jan bi ju ji bi chen bi la ji lo jan bi ju son le chung wo da to mo la ji lo jan bi ju ta la sam ba jan wo da sam ba de che bi che ta lo du se wa 다 상바장 오다 지된 심마도니 지든 제바단 지된 심마디 토템바 니마라 다 고트 지된 심마디 토템바들 정도들 레디니가 나네 워들레디 카둘레디 머레디 야
So again, we're looking today at Lama Tsong-kha-pa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment. And we'll begin by looking at the outline. The outline begins with relying upon the teacher, that is the root of the path. And then the second category is how students train their minds after having relied upon the teacher. Under that major heading of how students train their minds, we find two categories: an exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, and then a category called how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. Under the heading, the second heading, how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, we find three major categories: training the mind in the stage stages of the past shared in common with beings of small capacity, training the mind in the stages of the past shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and training the mind in the stages of the path for beings of great capacity. Under the heading, training the mind in the stage of the past shared in common with beings of small capacity, we have three categories. First, the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity. Second category, the measure of the attitude of a person of small capacity. And then the third category, dispelling any misconceptions related to a person of small capacity. So in that within those three categories, the first category, the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity, is broken down into two categories in the outline. First, developing the state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives, and then a second category of relying on a means for achieving happiness in one's next life, or a method for achieving happiness in future life. So these are the two categories under that heading. And that second category, the method for achieving happiness, there are two major headings. First, refuge, and then karma and its results. So the section that we're currently dealing with is the karma and its results section. So that's where we're going to begin.
Sonje ta lende she sambatala ane she sang chu ngwe dan so so shit sa je ni de gwa she samba ngwe de la le nge bi chu le pe chwa le ma ji ba de le je chu mo ze ba je de marba what rose ji za marba
So when we go to the section in the Lamrim Chenmo, or the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment on karma and its results, we find that the major name of the section is developing the faith and conviction in karma and its results, that is the root of all temporary happiness and certain goodness. So that's the major heading name, and then there are three major categories that then have subcategories underneath them. But the first category is reflecting on karma and its results in general. So the general way of reflecting on karma and its effects, or karma and its results. And then the next category is reflecting specifically about the specifics of karma and its results, or the particulars. I think it's translated as here, but it's the specifics, or the things that are not in common, the particulars of related to karma and its results. So the first category is generalities, the second is more specifics. And then the third category is, once you've looked at the general and specifics about karma and its results, how you engage in virtue and turn away from non-virtue. So this is the third category. So under that first category that deals with karma and its results in general, we find that there is the explanation of the explanation of karma and its effects in general is broken down into two major headings: the actual way in which to reflect generally, and reflecting on the distinctions or the differences among the varieties of karma. Then when we go to the first category under that section, the actual way to reflect on karma and its results in general, there are four headings. First, the certainty of karma. Second, the magnification of karma. Third, not experiencing the effects of actions that you did not do. And then fourth, the actions that you have done will not perish. So these are the four categories under the heading of the actual way in which you reflect in general about karma and its results. The Jilasa.
She samba the so shit samba what in the marbe. So shit samba the Lamrim Chenmo Beijena Dana Roger in Dua. Neba so shit samba la ni Lelan Jutu Tempat and ancient Angle Kusultana. Jadan Trojuni
Nipa Susu
Niba so shit samba la ni Lelan Jutu Tempat danza.
I'm just finding exactly where we are in the English. So reflections on the distinctions among the varieties of karma. So we find the outline on page 215. But if you go to 216, that's probably where we will begin.
Less
so. Yeah, so it's 216 where we start in the Tibetan. Less so.
Gawacho, Magawacho, Marbe, Gawacho, Magawacho, Tujining of Shade at Marbe, what the Shade of Dua, Gawacho, Magawacho, Lelancho to Tambasatele, Gawacho, the Magawacho,
Less so.
what the Shade Marbe,
Less so.
to Tambatans,
Less so.
Lelancho to Tambatan, Ledan Dributan of about the Nibatrua, Talela to Tambatala Marbe. I got it. Gawacho the Magacho, Marbe. Chetan Gawacho, Gawala Chubacano, Michad the Show Martina, Notan Tanju Coso, and Gawa, the Shit Chawatan, Deba Shito Rujine, Lelancho, Josombares, Lelancho Marbe. Tell the Chelon Dunene, Gadamagichiriva, Legelan Josonsos, Gawacho. Magawacho somebodies. Gawa yena gawacho kono chabata. Ne magawa yena magawacho kono chabade marete. Ne gawa kaso gawa shi chawata. Rabat so ruje ne jo somebodies anje ta. Tanju koso. Ane magawa yena magawacho kono chabade chago marete. Ina magawa shi chawara what somebody's
okay.
Go out to Tom Magojo. What is one thing about
Less so. So here we begin with reflecting on the distinction among the varieties of karma. So then there are two categories that are dealt with. First, the principal teaching of the 10 paths of action, and then the determination of the effects of actions. These are the two categories. And then here we begin with the principal teaching of the 10 paths of action. So when we look at action, we divide it into virtue and non-virtuous action. We find that there are the 10 paths of virtuous action that we've presented previously and will be presented now, and then the 10 paths of non-virtuous action that were previously presented and then will be presented now. So this principal teaching on the 10 paths of action is speaking of those actions or activities that are virtuous, and those 10 of those, and those actions or activities that are non-virtuous, and they're numbered in 10. And then it says the determination of the effects of actions. So here we find the determination of non-virtuous actions, what their results are, and virtuous actions, what their results are. And then we specifically find out that these 10 paths of action, be they virtuous or non-virtuous, are the coarse, great level activities. Now, this in no way is saying that these are the only virtuous paths or non-virtuous paths. So we can't say that if it is virtue, it is any among the 10 virtuous activities, or if it is non-virtue, it has to be among the 10 non-virtuous activities. This is not pervasive. This is not an all-inclusive list of actions that are virtuous and non-virtuous. This is a list that the Buddha compiled of very coarse, important behavioral modifications or behavioral activities one should engage in. The first deals with the actual 10 paths, and the second is the determination of actions and their effects, and then the facts that this is not a pervasive situation. This point is made within this. So then when we look at the classification of karma, and we look at these pathways, if we look at it in terms of pathways, when we look at the actions of non-virtue and actions of virtue, we can say that there are 10 pathways of non-virtue that lead to the lower realms, and there are 10 pathways of virtue that lead to the higher realms. So if we're looking at it in terms of their results, how these what they result in, these results are caused by these pathways that are compatible with their results.
Ta le la ju tu temba ta le dan debi ten la popo saji jirmi saji ni ro le la ju tu temba de la jang je bi saji sung ding do le la ju do dan ten ju le la ju tu temba tang ba je ta do dan ten ju kon ten sha bi ane gwa ju nya le je diba ju pong in sheda ke chubres import wo de ni ba ni ding do
The Tambo Sena?
Do dan tenju ta gwa ju dan ma gwa ju de su song ba de na ka dan ju de tenju de su song
Ah, le do dan.
Wo de song ba de
do dan denjor. Okay.
wo de tam je
Nene?
do dan tenju ne song sha bi gwa ju nya le je de ba ju bong ge ne shira ge ke chures de bu chu bu yong res wo de ni ba je
Nene?
tene somba de ta tuchu bon sa jindo tuchu bon ta soso ge tene tuchi da wa tene ji ma so wa je ana nga wa de nga taba dugo yo sa na ta saji gu hon dugo yo sa wa tene je ba ina na tuchu res te bon go res tuchi sa na ta ka so re tuchi da bon da tene ji se bo ma ba
Yanju Serna, the Sumba, Sutra, the Sutrim, the
tuchi bon sa ta ka de te ta 다 강자 그래 되는 연구에서 다 추진제 마소마지 안는 나와데 타바루겐이 사지고루겐 세계 유지로다 어디 아부 말에 추추레스 주마레스 어디 가도
okay.
추추스는 추진 마소벌 추진 송고연도 남지거로 어디 추출러도 말বে
The non-ethical. Okay, abandoning the idea of non-ethical. So this section, when we look at the Lamrim Chenmo, we find that Lama Tsong-kha-pa divides, reflecting on the distinctions among the varieties of karma, into two categories, dividing into the principal teaching on the 10 paths of action, and then the determination of effects of actions. And when we look at Jamyang Sheba's commentary, we find that there are three categories that this section is broken down into to be explained or commented on. So the first category is where this presentation has taken place. So what are we relying on as a source here? So here we're stating that the sutra, the sutra teachings and the authentic Indian commentaries, the Tanjir. So Rinpoche said Dodan Den. So the sutra and the authentic Indian commentaries are where we find the source material for this. So this is the first point that Jamyang Sheba makes in his outline. The second point that's made is the reasoning behind practicing virtue and abandoning non-virtue based on what the presentation based on the presentation in the sutras and the authentic Indian commentaries. So we begin with the source, the sutra and the authentic Indian commentaries, and then the next category of what we find in there that shows one should practice virtue and abandon non-virtue. And then the third category is abandoning the idea of the non-ethical. And Rinpoche was saying that this idea that these sorts of actions can't lead to liberation, or these sorts of actions can't lead to complete Buddhahood. So abandoning this non-ethical idea. So we'll get further into that third category, just because that was the one I was least clear on. But to this point, I think I've presented everything that's been presented.
Lelan jutu temba delta lanrichim zero nas marbe.
Okay.
Lelan jutu temba ta ledan rebetan la baba o tambo ne sa tambo ne te dara dudu ki junde 대대라 도둑이 준대 대유 줬던 대인데 뭐 가자 안에
Less so. Juje.
대유 줬던 거 말ပဲ
Less so.
거 주더와 안 대인데부터 도와지
Less so.
동행 줬대 먹어야지 안에 동행도 왔대죠 도둑이 준대 소송해 봤다 도둑이 준대 소송해 봤다
Ale.
레페치와다 그래서 대담을 쫓아대 양자시에도 도와 레네비투 레페치와 레마지바다 마체바
Less so.
레 셰바 추면서 어때 양자송도 말ပဲ
Less so.
대대라 도둑이 준대 소송해 봤다스 레네비투도 말ပဲ레페치와
Less so.
레페치와다 레마지바다 마체바다 레셰바 추면서 어디다 담을 친사버로다 그가 시사버다 시사들래 제바테 레단데비 주 전다시라 도망해봤지네 란도 샤장나스 달랭해비 주다 레페치와다 레마지바다 마체바 레셰바 추면서 어디서 내사버와 내사들래다 안에 그와 간다지 저거 간다지 냐는 제고를 간 본자 간다지 본고르나 그와 줄 냐는 제고래 and the debate to the Bongos or the
Less so.
None the Shashinas.
Less so.
What the college and the
Okay, so reflecting on the distinctions among the varieties of karma, we find those two categories. First category, the principal teaching on the 10 paths of action, and then the determination of the effects of action. So the first category, the principal teaching of the 10 paths of action, we find a question that's presented here. It says, given that I have ascertained the causality of happiness and suffering as explained previously, have understood that karma increases, that I will not meet with results of actions that I have not done, and that actions I have done will not perish, about what sorts of karma and its effects should I initially develop certainty? Which should I adopt and which should I cast aside? So here a question is presented about the information that was previously presented. So we previously had the information, the certainty of karma presented, the magnification of karma, not experiencing the effects of actions that you did not do, and then the actions that you do not perish. So we've previously gone over that, and it says, I've ascertained the causality of happiness and suffering. I've understood that the virtuous deeds, so the 10 virtuous actions cause happiness, and non-virtuous actions, such as the 10 non-virtuous actions, cause suffering. So one has ascertained this cause and effect relationship between non-virtue and suffering and virtue and happiness. So here it says, now that I've understood this cause and effect relationship, here it says the causality of happiness and suffering as explained previously, and then understood all the points within it, the certainty of karma, etc., etc., I already said. What should I do? So what should I adopt? So the 10 virtuous paths should be adopted, and what should be cast aside? The 10 non-virtuous paths are what to be cast aside. These are the initial things to adopt and cast aside, because these are the coarse behavioral modifications and behavioral practices that the Buddha set forth.
So then
there's a question that's been presented, so Lama Tsong-kha-pa will now give a response.
Ta leje leje de nyeshi jubu gote le nga yisonte ngres le nga yisonte tene goa juta mago juta shade marbe
Leso
le dan de bi tu jena ore leje nyeshi jubi gone sonte ngelas le nga yisonte res marbe ane sonte ngelas gosonje mago tanje leje cho mandu chance leje goa leje mago nga mago yeje mago chamalo Namago Chibukan Chabayo Mares. And Gosonji, Magawa Tanji, Gosonji Yenshi, Magawa Tanji, Lecture Mandu Chance, Mago Chibukan Chabayo Mare, Mago Chun Dug Mares, Mandu Chan, and Magawa Chu, and Gamagas, Gamagana, Chelonga, Raba, Kanamatoa, Jeshin to Chewana, Jeshin to Chewana, Sanji Jonen de Ne Dune, Nabi Lelancho Sonjins, that Deba Chewadan, Raba Zukalo, and the Sanji Ruru Jene, and Deba Chosombares, Deba Cho, and the Goa what the Raba down. Chot Rujene and the Goaju Tumbaris, Lelancho Son Shins, Tada Bonas, and the Magoaju Bongina, Bona, Tunshin to Cheese, Tunshin to Cheese, Nena Jan, Judune, Tunshin to Cheese, Nena Judune, Judua, Zine, Kabila Lancho Goaju Marbe, Goaju Tumbaris, Goaju Son Des, Doche. D'autant que cause ne gawada mo chu son chu si ja ji wo de ba ndo che ta ten ju ga san de re no ju de le chelon de ne ne ga da ma ge che re ba le jang lan chu son sos de le chelon de ne ma ga che wa da ga wa che wa zeng go ru je ne ga wa ju da de ba chu son ba res ta ma ndo tu se wo to son ma
okay
ta ma ndo ro ta ten ju do den ju de re no ju
So here it says in reply. In general, you can conclude that there are three ways to engage in good and bad conduct. So here the word good and bad are used. In the Tibetan, it's not as clear what this is referring to. So good is referring to virtuous action, and bad referring to non-virtuous action. So Rinpoche pointed that out, so I'm pointing this out. So the good and bad are referring to just that. Then it says physically, verbally, and mentally. So the three ways that we engage in actions are through our body, speech, and mind, physically, verbally, and mentally. Although not all the virtues and non-virtues of these three ways are included within the 10 paths of action, still the Buddha, the Bhagavan, summarizing the key points, taught the most obvious or course among the virtues and non-virtues as being the 10 paths of virtuous and non-virtuous actions. He taught that the extremely great foundations for a misdeed are the 10 paths of non-virtuous action. He taught that when you give up these 10, you adopt virtuous actions, and the most important points of these virtuous actions are also 10 in number. Therefore, he taught 10 paths of virtuous action. So here, we can say that non-virtue, if it is non-virtuous action of the body, speech, or mind, it is not necessarily any among the 10 non-virtuous deeds. So it's not, one does not pervade the other. So if it is a non-virtue of the body, speech, or mind, it is not necessarily any among the non-virtuous, 10 non-virtuous activities. And likewise, if it is a virtue of the body, speech, or mind, it is not necessarily among the 10 virtuous actions. So here it's saying that this is, these are not all inclusive. These are not the only ways one can engage in virtue or non-virtue. These are the most coarse, the most important points that the Buddha made, and the great foundations that were taught. Here it says, the Bhagavan, summarizing the key points, taught the most obvious or coarse. This is the point that's made here, is that if it is a virtue or a non-virtue, it is not necessarily among the 10 virtues or non-virtues. It doesn't pervade, one does not pervade the other. So then it says, we have a quote then to show where these key points were summarized, and it's from a sutra, The Treasury of Knowledge. It says, systemizing the most obvious among them, the Buddha said that the paths of action, virtuous or non-virtuous, are 10. So then we find a quote there from the Treasury of Knowledge that supports this idea of the number 10. So it's the Vinaya Vibhanga is where. No, I'm sorry. It doesn't say. I thought the Sanskrit might be here. So the Treasury of Knowledge is stated in. Dene?
Oh yeah.
The Dogi Long Labsang.
What the do song and gosong ji gema gitanje gosong ji gawa da magawa tanje gawa chu da magawa chun du mares le lan chu mandu jans ta gosong le ji gawa ngalo le ji gawa ane gaso gawa chu non du mares marba ane ngagi gawa ngalo ane deba seguro betar
Jubakarum yimi
macha logo mandwa tapana ngaso leje deba ina ne leje le naba so marbe so jeba majiba lama mazamba shiba so ta leje magawa ina so jeba majiba lama mazamba shiba sombu karo macha shosana sombu karo salana so jeba ina ko sombu karo re negre ni ina sombu karo re negre so re na sombu karo re negre
lasa
taba ina tangoni karo yi lagro taba ina tangoni karo yi mi ni gnan ji ina mi ni karo yi lagro aju ni gnan ne aju ji ina aju ni karo yi sigro leje magawa sombu karo nan ji re de na ju karo ro marbe
Mikchi Angjo Chi
Meji ina mini karoi
mini karo
na ji ina na ni karoi
then
taba ina tangani karo
tapa
ta leje le naba so marbe
lasso
leje le
suchupama
ane diba chug na leje le naba so ro ta
so
leje le naba so ro ta
lasso
leje diba ina leje le sum karoi ba acha
Macha.
Shows na.
Go shoot Chuchan.
Ungul Shiva ta and Tsuba ta Kumashina ku dibaro.
Mendacha.
Diba Manda Shuni Kamar Chabana Mashina ku dibaro.
Lesser.
Dibaro. And what is Sujuba Sujuba
Mayamba Kanj.
Masamashu
Mayamba Kanj.
Legile Sumukan Lege dibaro. Lege diba ina.
Lesso.
What do we call it?
Then the tambo, the boo, the tapa gare.
Tamani Karos, Tam Pujar, example. Taba ina Tangoni Karo in Sugaro. Mataba ina Tangoni Karo in Logro. Mataba.
Oh, okay. Two chena. So
that legile Nabasung on the G in a Sumukarore, Ni in a Sumukarore,
Sumukaros. Permanent. Okay.
Young Sumukaros Kala Nasayat Naku Keturuta. Yeah.
So Rinpoche is explaining this any among these. This is just as a translator's note. This is debate terminology. When we say any among the three, this is how you make certain whether something pervades something or not, or if it is under a category. So that's what this wording is for. So we're going to go over this a little bit, what this meaning is. So when we look at the various activities or actions that we can engage in, virtuous actions or non-virtuous actions, we engage in them through our body, speech, and mind. So here we're positing that if it is a virtuous action or a non-virtuous action, it is not necessarily among the 10 virtuous or non-virtuous actions. So when we look now specifically at the first of the three non-virtuous actions, the non-virtuous actions of the body, we find there are three. There is killing, there is stealing, and sexual misconduct. So what we're positing here is that if it is a non-virtue of the body, it is not necessarily among the three: killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct. It does not pervade it. So when we say it isn't among, it could be one of them, it could be two of them, it could be three of them, but it has to at least be one among. So when we're saying these three, when we're using a number three among these three, it has to at least be one of those. So when we look at, for instance, the topics of the topic permanence, permanence is among the two permanent and impermanent phenomena. So if we look at our eye is among our two eyes, is among our two eyes. If we look at our ears, our one ear is among our two ears. So this is what this terminology among is referring to. So when we say that if it is a non-virtue of the body, it is not necessarily the non-virtue of killing, the non-virtue of stealing, or the non-virtue of sexual misconduct. When we say it is not necessarily so, then when the question comes, posit that which is a non-virtue of the body then, which is not killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct, we would say, posit the subject hitting someone, posit the subject stabbing someone, posit the subject shooting someone. So we come up with these various examples which are necessarily non-virtuous actions of the body, but not among those three. So it is not necessarily not killing, it is necessarily not stealing, it is necessarily not sexual misconduct, but it is non-virtue of the body. So it isn't, but it is this. So that's why we can say machap. It does not pervade it, because we can posit something that is not among those three, which is the subject. Is that clear? You understand that? Less so. So if we were to say then, among these three non-virtues of the body, killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, and the subject, non-virtue, the Lujimagewa Chuchen? Okay, and the subject, non-virtue of the body, are there three permutations, four permutations? Are they mutually exclusive, or they are synonymous? So then we posit this question. So among these three categories and non-virtue, so are they three, four, mutually exclusive, or synonymous? Nika yimba suchupa chuchen. Nika mayimba zun. Zun. Shin. Okay, so musum. The musum yimba. Okay, so then the answer is three permutations. Because if it is among the non-virtues of the body, killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct, it is a non-virtue of the body. It is necessarily non-virtue of the body. If it is among those three, it is necessarily a non-virtue of the body. If it is a non-virtue of the body, it is necessarily not among those three. Posit that which is not among those three, stabbing someone. Stabbing someone is a non-virtuous action of the body, but does not fall categorically under any among those three, killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct. Something that which is both killing. So killing is both non-virtue of the body, and killing is, the action of killing is among the three non-virtuous activities of the body. It's the first one, killing. And then if you say posit something which is neither, you can say a tree. I said or lying. So this is how you would look at it. So there would be three permutations. So basically, if there is one of the categories pervades the other, but the other doesn't, you're going to come up with 3 permutations.
다 나게 먹어
Gets
야
good.
오케이 야 오케이 대도 그신
What if it's killing, and it's a virtuous killing?
The Gewe Suchupa Gare. Gewe Suchupa. Gangesena the Sanjay. The Suchupa the Yena. That's a deeper yin.
예수 제바와 다든 가서 그래 다 어떤 대변 니주제 만난 도통 세바 말베 대변 니주제 나 만난 도통 세바로 어떻게 투모 조바 인서버 봐 특별히 거래는 말와 만난 도통 그게 조진은 저게 뭔가자데 세는 그 잘라간 그 제기 인서버 다 대변 니주 콜 히제네 탑고 뭔가자 세바이나 그냥 녀와는 그래 되는 곳에잖아 히제는 곳에바 이제로다 대변 히지제 만난 도통 세바 피지 거만와
Then yune yin then muji.
히지 셈을 끊는 나와
Then yune yina then muji. Gangesena the Suchu yina the Migewa Macha show.
수제바이나 알레 코드 들어다 어떻게 도바진도다 어떻게는 마저는 무슨
Deshana then muji.
대자는 마저는 도
Yine the Suchupa the Migewa yin goatel. Migewa Jew, the Migewa Jew. Gewa yomare.
히지
This Suchupa Migewa yin.
히지 끊는 수제바이지로 어떻게 거인선은 지금 돼
Yine the Migewa Chu Migewa sum karo yim macha gange sena the Gewa yin.
어떤 데잖아 다 마저는 것도
Yine the Migewa yomare. Okay, so this is a debate that could take place, absolutely, because there, as we find out of great compassion, times where there has been a killing that has taken place. For instance, when the Buddha was a riverboat captain, and he realized that a thief on board was going to take over and kill all the people on board and steal everything, and then would accumulate the non-virtue himself of killing, and then the others would be killed, Buddha actually engaged in killing. So there is a quote in scripture that says, if it is done out of great compassion with awareness, then it can be, the act of killing can be a virtuous activity. So if we are going to posit this as a potential killing, then we have to say there are 4 possibilities. Now this is something that would be debated, certainly, but if we are going to posit it, then we have to say there are 4 possibilities, because if it is killing, it is not necessarily non-virtue. But here we're speaking of among the back and forth was that we're speaking of among the 3 non-virtuous activities of killing, which categorically wouldn't have a virtue under it. So that's the other way it would be debated at it if it were going to be posited as something that was killing and virtue. That in this case we're talking about those things under the umbrella of the 3 non-virtues among the 10 that are related to the body. But you can certainly debate that it could be 4, because killing could be a virtuous activity if we were to look at it in all these ways. So Rinpoche said it's very good to look at all these possibilities and to understand this material thoroughly. So thank you, Ted. So this is good to have these doubts, these ideas that cause this thought. So first we thought 3, and now we end up with possibly 4. Yine, the Migewa Jew Mayimba, Gangesena Gewa yin. Gewa da Migewa Gelwa. Then Nika Yimba Yoatal. Migewa da Migewa Nika Yimba Mush. Lessa. So if we say non-virtue, the non-virtuous action of killing, then it's necessarily going to be 3 possibilities. If we just say killing, then we could come up with 4 possibilities. So if we have the specificity where we started with, we were saying the 10 non-virtuous activities. If we're saying any among these 3 non-virtues of the body, killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct. So if we're saying it's the non-virtuous action of killing, then we come up with 3 permutations. But if we leave that part out and just say killing, we can arrive at 4.
어쨌나 레지 먹어 손부 거론다 레지 먹을 무슨 레지 그는 수 제바서 라서는 맞지 되는 거.
So if we are saying that if it's among these 3 non-virtues of the body, killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct, and it's that killing, it's necessarily we're going to come up with 3 permutations. But if we just say killing, then we can come up with 4 permutations. You see, the dialogue Rinpoche and I were having is then we're saying there's a common locus between virtue and non-virtue. There's something that which is both. They aren't mutually exclusive. So that would be the consequence, and that's the reason for the correction of killing without the addition of the non-virtuous activity of killing, because non-virtue and virtue are mutually exclusive.
레지 먹어 손부 거론다 레지 먹어 무슨 제로와.
So
레지 그는 수 제바서 라서나 수 제바서 라서나 어때 도바도.
in Gewa,
레지 수 제바이나 먹어 이미 베지 맞춰서 고. 마만도 동시에 다 간데 한국도 산타바이나 트라픽은 드야트는 왜 말해. 그세 버로다.
and the Sanjay, the drone, the Sesa, the Kanga Gewa, the Beche Kashe, the Detsa Deepa Yure. Beche Kashe, the Kalen, Detsa Deepa Yure, Gangasen Suchusum. I said some books say that this act of killing left an imprint of a negativity, even though it was overwhelmed by the virtue. There was still an imprint of the negativity. He said, yes, some books do say that. So this is... So Ralo Sawa was someone who brought the Yamantaka teachings to Tibet. So at first, when he brought this Yamantaka lineage to Tibet, they said that this wasn't an authentic practice, and they were saying that this was a spirit of some sort, that this was not a real deity to practice. So then, through black magic and the Kser, black magic. So through Ralo Sao, through black magic, actually killed 13 of these people disputing this idea. So then a Geshe said to him, this doesn't make any sense. You're a Geshe, and you are a monk that you have killed. This is not compatible. Shabudun Kong Segre. So then in Shabudun Gemma. Okay, then he said, well, in 7 days I'm going to kill you. To the person, the Geshe. So it was a Geshe saying this to Ralo Sao, you're a monk, you're a Geshe. And he said, well, in 7 days I will take your life. So then the Geshe was a great scholar and went into a meditation upon emptiness. So then 7 days passed and Ralo Sao's black magic killed him. So there's some doubt here around this Yamantaka lineage. So this is within the Yamantaka lineage and the story of lineage. So here's an act of killing that took place where we also find this doubt that arises of whether what it is about. So then that is why we can possibly say that if one commits the act of killing with the body, it isn't necessarily non-virtue.
다 어때 르지 먹어 숨고 가는 또 르지 먹어 무슨 이거 어떠러와 다 나게 먹어 집어 가는 다 나게 먹어 집어 갔어.
Okay, so then, so if we say the two, among the three non-virtuous activities of the body, killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, and non-virtue of the body, we find there are three permutations when we compare those two subject matters. Now, what if we compare the two subject matters of the between the speech and non-virtue of the speech? So, any among the four non-virtues of the speech, lying, harsh words, gossip, and divisive speech, and the subject, non-virtue of the speech. Are there three permutations, four permutations? Are they mutually exclusive, or are they synonymous?
다 나고는 사비 먹어 이제 말이지. 준 참아 제조 가지지. 어때 나가 먹어 이제 보거로이나 나가 먹어 임차. 나게 먹어 이나
Matcha.
나가 먹어 이나 이제 보거로이 맞죠. 쇼. 어디서
네, 칼리카, 나 가상 같이
녀모제제 나이나 나체 미쳐서 나체 미쳐로 나체 녀모제군 제베니스 녀모제지 쓰이나 나체 미쳐서 녀모제군 제베니스 저거 어디서 도다
녀몬챙이 찌이나
나체 미쳐서 나체 녀모제군 제베니 나체
나게와
나기 녀모제지 나이나 나체 미쳐서
나체스나
나체 준 참아 치수 나체 말아 나체
okay. Dene the matcha show sena sumusa
나기 먹어 이나 나체 미쳐서 라서도 비치 천된다고 하는데 돼지 아이미
big
나가 먹어 이나 집에 가는 바죠.
차 녀몬chen si yembeche 녀몬chen si
어째 도와도다. 비치 돼지를 잡으면
then the long cabane 녀몬chen
녀모제군 제바니 즈르
zu okay vana
녀모제 쓰이나 나체 미쳐서 나체
so
다들
then
비치 돼지 잡으면 돼. 나가 먹어 집에 가는 다 나가 먹어 집에 가도 나가 먹어 이나 나가 먹어 집에 가는 바죠. 차가 나체 미쳐요.
나체
녀모제군 제바니
So then, when we get to this one, it becomes a little more difficult. So if we were to say, look at it in the same way as before. If it is among the four non-virtues of the speech, lying, harsh words, divisive speech, or gossip, it is necessarily non-virtue of the speech. So then the next one, if it is non-virtue of the speech, if we say it is not necessarily among those four, then we say show, we run into a problem. Because in the Abhidharma teachings, it states that all afflicted, all words possessing afflictions fall within the four. So this is stated in the Abhidharma. All words possessing afflictions fall within those four categories of lying, divisive speech, harsh words, or gossip. So if this is the case, then we have to say that that does pervade that, which then makes them synonymous. So in this case, so this is where a doubt again arises. So if we look at the quote from the Abhidharma, and we see that all of those words possessing afflictions, or that are possess afflictions, fall categorically under these four, then we can't say there is something outside of that that is a sound. See this word, the word could be sound also. So word, it's a tsik. So there's nothing outside of it according to the Abhidharma. So based on that logic, we have to say synonymous, that both pervade each other. That if it is among the four non-virtuous activities of the body, it is necessarily, of the speech rather, it is necessarily a non-virtuous activity of the speech. If it is a non-virtuous activity of the speech, it is necessarily among the four non-virtuous activities of the speech, if we're saying that they are synonymous.
준 참아 지도 뜻송부대 나체되는 거도 녀무진 쓰임베시 녀무진 구제반이 셰송베시.
And the reason that we say there isn't something outside of these is because it's stated that the four lying, harsh words, gossip, and divisive speech are the complete listing of that which is words possessing afflictions. So it's all-inclusive, words possessing afflictions. I might have added a word or two here, but that's just to keep the same meaning and for fluidity. So it's possessing, there are words possessing afflictions, and they are these four are those. So when we look at what lying is, it's saying to someone else something that is not true. So saying something to someone else that is not true. Tamasheba. So divisive speech is referring to trying to take two people who are in some way together and dividing them with your words, dividing the way they feel about each other with your words. So this is what divisive speech means. Harsh words is saying something mean, something bad. Ducha, saying something bad. And then gossip is there's so many meanings of what we could say that is. So many things we talk about that would be gossip. This dunda means meaning. So things we do that would fall categorically under gossip. There are many.
So
then when we say that lying, divisive speech, and harsh words and gossip are among the words that are possessing afflictions, or words of possessing afflictions.
Take a
short break, and we'll be back. Okay. Oh, okay. Kanga. Jukanga. Okay. So we find differences when we go back to this idea of non-virtuous activity. and we look at the listing of 10 non-virtuous activities, we have to look at them according to vehicles as well. So when we look at the lesser vehicle, or the Hinayana, we would find abstention from all of these 10 non-virtuous activities under all circumstances. There are no circumstances that would warrant an infraction. Whereas when we look at the perfection vehicle, or the bodhisattva vehicle, the perfection vehicle, and specifically the bodhisattva vehicle, we find where there are cases that it is necessary, in order for a bodhisattva to keep his or her ethics, to actually break some among the non-virtuous 10 non-virtuous activities, and it's actually permitted. The dowa nangla, the sanchi semba, the
deba mago chute wote themen chuge su dong dun
less de lasa.
no yo maras pashin tibi chanju so toba ina na mesi yoris manan dong dong se ya yin ban ba
Min I don't know.
teben hinju je manan dong dong se ro de mesi yiro ta mesi no yoris.
Okay. So then we find for those bodhisattvas that are very highly realized, where it is actually permitted in actions that they must engage in of non-virtue, such as the act of the previous story of killing with the captain and so forth. And then in the tantric tradition, we find that if it is necessary for you to engage in a non-virtuous activity, and this is for a highly realized high person, if it's necessary for you to engage in a non-virtuous activity in order to aid someone in some way, and you do not, you actually break your tantric vows by not breaking the non-virtuous vows, or by not engaging in the non-virtuous activity. So we find that there are different levels of understanding related to these virtues and non-virtues. And at the Hinayana level, there is abstinence from all 10 non-virtuous activities under all circumstances. And then there are circumstances that warrant it. And then at the tantric level, it's necessary, one must do, must engage in these things. So we find differences in the traditions according to the Hinayana vehicle, the perfection vehicle, and the tantric vehicle.
What the deba mago chu the theme da shaju samba da and then hage what the chaba.
So these are the differences we find in the Hinayana tradition, the perfection vehicle of the Mahayana, and then the tantric vehicle of the Mahayana. These are the differences that we find in ideas.
Ta ngage nabaje ta ngage mago atal beji and ngaso beji neji chade nabaje re mas a nyomoji ngi cheba ni la sa du ta yiji mago ata na sen ne sen luta sum ko chab karan dos
Dunchi.
ya yiji magawa da yiji magawa na sen ne sen luta sum butle chab karan dos na yiji magawa ina na sen ne sen luta sum ko ron cha cha so na ya sana chu je de sum ko ron yibata
Yin. Luta yin be chair.
sana luta sana luta cha yi de ji bara
Yo mare.
an de cha chu je ya de sum ko ron yibata de cha de cha in de na ji su ta wa ta ta zen ha ji mari ba lama na ma go os de na ji da je ta zen ha ji ni de ma do de bi nyu mo ko lo ma go is so ro da de na ji tu ta wa ta zen ha ji mari ba lama na ma go os de cha to ko so ma lo ma go in la ro da te ji wo de te mo so re ro da na sen no sen Lota sumba karo ina yeji mago imi cha yeji mago in tim ma jo de cha nasen de ba nasen sana pechen de cha in samaran de cha mejen dal jil jala pu ta ba jo ba ina o tangal gu gu du nya ba na de nasen pechen de cha in jo nasen
Lesa.
nasen ta khondo de ji samar ba lotan ta le ju de yo ma re kon chu yo ma so te ngod nge u du
Then the Sena.
Sana debi sana de ne magoro ta na se maro nese marwa lota marwa
Maru.
sumgoro tembo sonre
Then Tambo Gare Sumpare, the Dawa, the Ni.
de na jisu de binyo mung do ne
Dubi.
loma de kazi yus ne mago kazi yus tingoro da de na jisu ta de bi nyomung ne jita ta tanjin heji ni bu loma de res te mai ma sama nyomung ko lo mago res de na jisu ta tanjin heji mariba hamana mago hos mago is la oro da
Jita Dang.
jita ta jinda jisu ta tanjin heji tata im tata.
So then, the next category that we look at is the category of the non-virtues of the mind. So when we look at the non-virtues of the mind, we have covetousness, harmful intent, and wrong view. So then, how would we look at this in terms of three permutations, form permutations, mutually exclusive or synonymous? So if it is among the three non-virtues of the mind, covetousness, harmful intent, or wrong view, is it necessarily non-virtue of the mind? Yes. If it is non-virtue of the mind, it is necessarily among the three non-virtuous activities of the mind, covetousness, harmful intent, or wrong view. So the answer, Rinpoche is saying, is no. Because, for instance, the subject, the miserliness, miserliness would not be categorically wrong view, harmful intent, or covetousness. And then Rinpoche gave the example of attachment, but it depends on what this attachment is, because covetousness would cover mostly the attachment that we're thinking of when we come up with this idea or subject of attachment being something which is not among those three, because this covetousness is this attachment, coveting something. And then Rinpoche, you gotta give me 1 second here.
Zanyo Doro Ndecha, Kondro, Naje, Nyomoje Mariba, Nyomoje Tawa, Nyomoje Tazong, True Marbe, Zanyo True. Zanyo True, Tan Decha to what the Mago in Jeruta, Dechaji, Kondrije, and Nyomoje Tawa, Lanjita, Tata, Lota, to Nyomoje, what is Tonga Marbe. Tonga Nana Jita Tan Dun Jisu Tawa Tan Tadil Leji Maripa Hamanan Mugo Jita Tata Nide Lomateis Jeda Galo Tonga Nana Rabajit Mugo Ilobude.
So, when we look at the different six divisions of the wrong views, the six root afflictions, rather, that's what they're called. The six root afflictions of attachment. I'm having a moment here. Just give me a second here. Because there's more that's going to go with it, and just give me one moment here. So the six root afflictions of attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, doubt, and afflicted view. And then when we look under the category of afflicted view, we have the view of the transitory collection as I or mine, the view holding to an extreme, conception of a bad view as supreme, conception of bad ethics and modes of conduct as supreme, and perverse view. So when we look at among these different afflicted views, then the Jisutawa, the Gai Lumaten. Jita, Tata, Luta, Dao Chunzin, Suchin Dang.
Jita Tang, Tata Nite, Lumaten res. The Maimita Tawa Kazil
So we say that the view of the transitory collection and the view holding to an extreme categorically fall under lumaten, that which has not been presented in scripture, or neutral. Gewa mi gewa mai karum mayin. Okay, karum mayin. Luma Ten. Then we find Dao Chunzin and Suchin Dan Luta Migewa Yin. Okay, then we find the other three afflicted views of conception of a bad view as supreme, conception of bad ethics and modes of conduct as supreme, and perverse view as non-virtue. So these are categories of non-virtue. Then the Dao Chuzin, Chu Chen, the Sumba Karun Yimbi Mayimbi Cha Mayimba.
Jita Tatarwa. Dao Chunzin the Peche was Luma Dame, Luma Dame. Jita Tatani the Luma Dame, Luma Dame. Tena Nishiro Chua, Kunzi, Chiba, Chaba, Sana, Chadu, Yo, Jo, Jaba, Nansen was a member. What does Golo, the Vinyamoro, Magoro, Lurin.
And then we have the 20 secondary afflictions, Nishu, 20 of belligerence, resentment, concealment, spite, jealousy, miserliness, deceit, dissimulation, haughtiness, harmfulness, non-shame, non-embarrassment, lethargy, excitement, non-faith, laziness, non-conscientiousness, forgetfulness, non-introspection, distraction. So these are all secondary afflictions of the mind. So then the Kanga, the Migewa Yin, and these are all necessarily non-virtue. So we're showing possibilities of things that we have to think about if they connect to those three, just as a note of what, if I'm not connecting this well, because I'm kind of going around back and forth. So we're looking at these different types of afflictions. So we looked at the root afflictions, and then we looked at the 5 afflicted views which are in among those root afflictions, which would be the 6th of the root afflictions. And we found that the first 2 are not presented in Scripture or neutral, the view of the transitory collection, the view of the extreme, and that the last 3 are necessarily non-virtue. Conception of a bad view is supreme, conception of bad ethics and modes of conduct is supreme, and perverse view. So we find these are non-virtue. And then when we looked at the 20 secondary afflictions, we find that those are all necessarily non-virtuous activities. And Rinpoche said that we find the presentation of these root afflictions and secondary afflictions and so forth in the Lorig teachings, the mind and awareness, the Kanga Lasan, Nishu Kanga Lasan. So he said, so if we say something that is non-virtue of the mind, but not necessarily among those 3 non-virtues of the mind, and then say show something or posit that, we come up with so many different possibilities. So we come up with many different possibilities.
So we
find many non-virtues of the mind which necessarily do not fall into the category among those 3. Among those 3 categories. There is a doubt about we have a doubt about the speech. So then, we come up with the 3 possibilities related to the mind. So that is 3 permutations. The speech, we have doubt. So doubt arises related to speech. We arrived at synonymous, but we have a doubt there. And then the first one, we come up with 3 permutations. If it is a non-virtue of the body, it is not necessarily among the 3 non-virtuous activities of the body. So that is where we've arrived at. So now we're going through it. So if it is a non-virtue of the body, is it necessarily among the 3 non-virtuous actions of the body?
Logic all the some achasana, much of Mamasha.
Okay, so then
Chobambiwa, Shatsawa, what to go Marbe.
Maybe I the Chu Gewa, get your shit.
Logic was
then my fault.
Go
get me, but she.
Bomba Majima, Bomba Sunta. The logic go in at the Sumgorum Bacha. Much of shows and a Shatsawa, Chobambiwa. I
made a mistake just in the last thing I translated. We're speaking now about virtue. So when we look at the 10 virtuous activities, and then we look at virtuous activities of the body, we find where Rinpoche posited the question about virtuous activities of the body. If it is a virtuous activity of the body, it is necessarily among the 3 virtuous activities of the body. So when we look at what those 3 virtuous activities of the body are, the virtuous activity of abandoning killing, abandoning stealing, and abandoning sexual misconduct. So then the question is placed. If it is a virtuous activity of the body, is it necessarily among the 3 virtuous activities of the body, which are the abandonment of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct? And if you answer no, it is not necessarily so, then you would say, well, posit that which is a virtue of the body, but not among the 3 virtuous activities of the body. And then Rinpoche gave the answer of making a prostration, making an offering, being generous in some way. There's many, many examples.
Logile Nabas Nag Nabajimarbe, Zimbumba, Tamapumba, Jibum, Jimguruda, Jeje, and the Nagikaina, the Jibgon Achamaja.
Macha.
Karjao, Tuta.
The Ngashatse.
Dun Tama Chituro, Dunji Tama Chituchi.
Ngashatse.
Nachi Pumba.
Nga Shatsewa.
Shatsewa. Then the Jibba Bejo Shajatubala, Shatselo, Theatre Uman Mamas, not Jewish Gawai. So, Uman payment was not. What a good law would.
So then, the next is, if it is a virtue of the speech, is it necessarily among the 4 virtues of the speech? So the 4 virtues of the speech of abandoning lying, abandoning divisive speech, abandoning harsh words, and abandoning gossip. So is it necessarily among those 4? So if we say, no, it's not, then what if we posit paying homage, to verbal prostration? To the Lord Buddha, I pay homage. So to the conqueror, to the one thus gone, to the Lord Buddha, the conqueror, I pay homage. So if we make this statement of paying homage to the Buddha, then does this praise itself categorically fall under any among those 4?
And I
forgot, also mantric recitation. The Teata Om Muni Muni Mahamuni E Soha. This is virtue, a mantra of the speech. Or the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra. Or saying Amitabha, Amitabha. These sorts of pronouncements are necessarily virtue, but do they fall categorically under any among those 4 virtuous activities of the body? So if you say, to the founder, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly completed Buddha, glorious conqueror, Buddha Shakyamuni, I prostrate. That was the exact quote. Then this is a virtue of the speech. Is it among those 4? So when we look at virtue of the mind, if it is a virtue of the mind, is it necessarily among the 3 virtuous activities of the mind?
Shanchu Senta, Hiji Chemutan, what to call Nasen Pombe, Nasen Pombatan, Nasen Nusen, Lotapomba to Aime.
Semche Nusen.
She drew down. What the government Yaguacho.
The Nusen Pomba. Semche Nusen Pomba.
What does it do?
Okay, so then if we say subjects such as the mind that aspires to enlightenment, bodhicitta, or great compassion, is it the abandonment of those three, covetousness, harmful intent, or wrong view? So what my response was, just as because I don't want to have some private conversation, was that isn't bodhicitta the opposite of harmful intent? So Rinpoche said that's something we have to think about. Where are we?
And Leland Juro Mandu chance, Gosunji Gamagataji, Leland Jur Mandu chance, Luigi Goaina, Goajib Gorim Achao, Nagi Goaina, Goajib Gorim Achao, Iji Goaina, Gosum Gorim Achao, Tubadota.
So then the reason for this discussion we just had is this. In general, you can conclude that there are three ways to engage in good and bad conduct, physically, verbally, and mentally. Although not all virtues and non-virtues of these three ways are included within the 10 paths of action. So that sentence, not all virtues and non-virtues of these three ways are included within the 10 paths of actions, require that discussion.
This way. What
So now we'll read again. Where?
Gosonji Gawataji, Gaju Korum Dugumare, Gosonji, Magawataji, Magajubu Korum Dugumare.
That's
what is that? What you what the
so here, again, so the reply then is where we're reading from directly again. In general, you can conclude that there are three ways to engage in good and bad conduct. Physically, verbally, and mentally. So we can engage in virtue and non-virtue through our body, speech, and mind. Although not all virtues and non-virtues of these three ways are included within the 10 paths of action. And also one other point that I wanted just to make in the English here, where it's talking about the 10 paths of non-virtuous action and the 10 paths of virtuous action. Within this body of this text, it talks also of it in terms of white deeds and black deeds. And Rinpoche pointed out again that white deeds are virtuous action and black deeds are non-virtuous actions. It's been interpreted already, but the Tibetan literally speaks of black and white, and it hasn't been interpreted in the Tibetan.
And Lunga Yisung Gawa Tanji Gawa Jubukanum Dugumare, Lunga Yisung Diba Tanji Mago Jubukanum Dugumazura, Mandu Jans.
So here it's saying are not included within the 10 paths of all are not included within the 10 paths of action. So what this is saying is, if it is a virtuous action or a non-virtuous action, it does not necessarily categorically fall in among the 10 virtuous or non-virtuous actions. So that's what it's saying. If it is a virtuous or a non-virtuous action, it does not necessarily fall in any among the 10 virtuous or non-virtuous actions.
So
we already went over the non-virtue of the body. That is not necessarily among the three non-virtues of the body. We've already gone over what examples of that might be. So then, if it is a non-virtue of the speech, is it necessarily among the four non-virtues of the speech? Here we arrive at a doubt. So then if we say if it is a non-virtue of the mind, if we say it is not necessarily among the three non-virtues of the mind, then when we say to posit something, we have many examples that we can posit. Okay. So then, if we look at it from the perspective of virtuous action, if it is a virtuous action, if we say it's not necessarily among the three virtuous actions, we come up with many different examples of things that are virtuous actions of the body, I'm speaking of, that are not among the three virtuous actions of the body. When we get to the mind, we have, if it is a virtuous action of the mind, if we say it is not necessarily among the four virtuous actions of the mind, of the speech, I'm losing it here a little bit. So if we say that if it is a non-virtue of the speech, it is not if we say it is not a virtue of, let me try this again. If we say it is a virtue of the speech and not necessarily among the four virtues of the speech, and then we are asked to posit that, we can give many examples, such as paying verbal homage to the Buddha, Bhagavan. And then if we come to the category of virtue of the mind, that is not necessarily among the three virtues, virtuous actions of the mind, we find many examples of that, such as great compassion and so forth. So these are all ways in which we analyze virtue and non-virtue in terms of pervasion. So here, if it is a virtuous action and it does not necessarily fall in any among the 10 virtuous actions, and if it is a non-virtuous action, if it is a non-virtuous action, it does not necessarily have to fall among the 10 non-virtuous actions, then what is the point of the presentation of the 10 virtuous actions and the 10 non-virtuous actions? So if it doesn't necessarily, if it is a virtue or a non-virtue, and it doesn't necessarily fall within any among the 10 virtues or non-virtues, what's the point of the presentation of the 10 virtues and non-virtues? So then Lama Tsong-kha-pa goes on to say why. Lama Tsong-kha-pa says, still the Buddha, the Bhagavan, summarizing the key points, taught the most obvious or coarse among the virtues and non-virtues as being the 10 paths of white and black actions, or virtuous and non-virtuous actions.
mago chun andu
yin.
du se la urda khane sun paseba maseba drajumba seba sonde sujuban du marbe ane tijishi balanga sen chanjimba de sujubi juan du da isjuwa sujubi lekarboda sonji se tu marboda tijishi balanga sen
A nusen. Chishin.
tijishi balanga sen chanjimba se sonji se ya donda le chonche de nabe ko san suya san yoro
Soma, you're it.
anu ko suya beje jebro
Less so.
어째 도마로다. 어때 수집이 좋아했어.
Less so.
수집이 좋아한데 그래서 다 근데게 엔지바 근데 또 시잖아. 가서도 다른 뜻 준준준. 란.
Tamasheba Yomare. Zun.
참 준디스 준. 근데게 엔지바데 준온데 준 참아체도 준온데.
Are they? Okay. So then when we look, for instance, if we say that all virtue and non-virtue are not necessarily included among the 10 categories of virtue and non-virtue, then what about the 5 heinous crimes, for instance, or the 5 irreversible actions? So how do we look at this? So we begin with killing one's mother. That's killing. That's a killing of the body. So this is non-virtue of the body. Killing one's father, non-virtue of the body, killing. Killing a photist, an arhat, non-virtue of the body, killing. Drawing blood from a Buddha, the intention is there to kill. One is trying to kill. You can't kill a Buddha, and this is why is just drawing blood from a Buddha, but the activity of killing is the intention to truly kill is there. And by drawing the blood, you've gone as far as you possibly can with a Buddha, because you can't actually kill a Buddha. So the act of killing is present within that action. And then the dividing the Sangha is lying categorically. And I asked Rinpoche if it's divisive speech, and he said no, it categorically falls under lying, like saying untruths to the Sanghas to separate them. So we find this in Shamar Pandita's Lamrim. Then Rinpoche, Garishene the Tamasheba Yomare. So it's lying to these Sangha members, saying that which is and is, and that which is isn't to them, which creates this. So this is lying.
주자바도 가르스나 디바 치워 주자버스 오늘 참행가 주지 디바 치워로다 뭐 가른 뒤스나 파세바 마세바다 좀 마세바 손데 수주반 뒤베인스 근데기 엔제바데 준온 뒤르 준타마 준마르베 데네 디지시발랑에서 찬지바데 수주 조안 뒤르
Joa, okay.
조아
So then when we say that if hold on, I lost it. Let's go. So if we say that if it is virtue or non-virtue, it does not necessarily fall categorically among the 10 virtues or non-virtues. Then we look at the various acts. The Yanjar Suran Rinpoche, Jason. The Dondagara.
달리 천원 뒤에는 서다 먹어 쳐와 주데 주자버에서는 참행아 주 주는 가리스 어디 두발해요.
So then it says here there are key points, summarizing the key points, the most coarse. So then we were saying that are these the greatest levels of negativity that we can say that this kind of covers? And then when we look to the 5 heinous crimes, we see that they're all represented. The 5, the worst actions, the 5 most heinous actions, the 5 most irreversible actions are covered under this category of the 10 non-virtuous activities. So when we look at killing one's father, killing one's mother, killing an arhat, this categorically falls under killing. And then if we look at this drawing blood from a Buddha, committing killing, or how you would translate it, acting to kill, or committing the action of killing. And then this last category of dividing the Sangha members, this is lying. So when we look at these heinous activities, we see that all can be found within these 10 non-virtues, which are these coarse points or key points that the Buddha made about behavior.
도송바 이나는 참행아 주의 가리선 도발레고로 조송신사 다다 보나 먹어 주부도 보바 이나 편집을해서 다다 보나 전신도 치 내나장 준두와 지내서 네 거와주도 말베 준두와 지내 가빌레나 조송대사 안는 줄에 텔레 철론 되네네 gādāma kī chirīpa lēcānāṁ chū sōngsūt tēnchū marba tēnchū yā.
He taught that the extremely great foundations for a misdeed are the 10 paths of non-virtuous action. So here, this was the most obvious or coarse related to non-virtue. And he saw that when you give up these 10, you adopt virtuous activities, and that the most important points of these virtuous actions are also a number of 10. So these are the coarse key points that are being spoken of up top, the virtuous 10 and the non-virtuous 10. For the point of it being such a great importance, and when you begin to question it, are these really the most key points, the roughest, coarsest actions? You move right to the heinous actions, the heinous crimes, the 5, and see that they are represented here. Rinpoche, the Tetsuwa Yure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But the karma associated with mind can be great, so great compared to action karma and speech karma. So those are speech and action karma related to the mind, that it can be huge, amplified compared to non-action. So how does that fall related to that? Those two,
the mind is the chief. Is that
because those two only say speech and body actions, but then the mind action is great too. So and Rinpoche gave many examples of the mind being huge. So can that be really huge karma too?
The action of the mind.
The wrong action related to the mind.
The
huge.
The yijile, the yijimigewa le. Do you want to know if the result can be huge?
Yeah, the result of those are actions of body and.
You mean the 5 heinous actions?
Those are five heinous actions are body
related to
body
and mind
and speech. But there's also great actions of the mind.
The pasepa masepa the nga.
Well,
Samenga the lujile dangaile. The same dan drapo the yijile yirbe.
Samenga salana pasepa masepa ne dajumba sepa sana lujile marbe.
Lesso.
Lujilero. Lujugun suju basa.
Lesso.
Suju barendoa. Tene tijinshi balanga sen chanji masana. 샤자도 버세 도와요 말. 샤자도 버세야 그 선단에 전체나 번들 제바이나 내서 그 찬지. 수주비 좋아했어. 수주비 내가 집으로.
레서.
근데 근데게 에너지 봐서 그는 조신 좋아들었다. what the 주인.
얘네 the 루당아 Yi Chenmo Yerbe.
주의선은 가로다.
Yine Kongi Chua de nga lo da nga ki mige.
참행하대.
De same nga lo da nga mige.
참행아 안에 르지 먹어 손도사 손
Lesso.
파세바 마세바 타중바 세바 손데 르지 먹어 말베.
Yine de same nga de migewa angi tambo kongitsu. Then yichi migewa angi tambo garre.
르지 먹어 왔더니 이
Gangi sene de yichi migewa de jepo chembo yongre.
근데기 엔제바디 엔제바 주인 서송기 what 주인 가로
Yichi migewa chembo garre. The bu sono.
르지 먹어 와
Chembo, share chembo, the same nga dan rabudu.
그래도 파수야가 상로다 마수야가 상로다 다중바 수야가 상로다 주인지로다.
So the act of thinking to kill one's mother, the thinking to kill one's father, think of killing the arhat is the act as strong as the activity for the mind. I asked him I said that I know it took a while, but I explained that the 5 heinous crimes seem to be the ultimate of negativity when we look at them in terms of Buddhism, the ultimate negatives, the 5 irreversible actions. But it seems like when we break those actions down, those actions are related, as we said, 4 of them to the body and 1 to the speech. So is there something that is of that same degree that would be of the mind? So that's how I arrived at the answer that we arrived at, just to give you how I asked the question. And Rinpoche then came with the answer of this thinking to kill one's father, thinking to kill one's mother, identifying one's father or mother and thinking to kill.
다 먹어 주들 중앙 조선 선나 대바치주레스 니왈 제그레스 니마도 마사나 예달 제그레스 지만 마도 마산 돈을 제그레스 어tl어도 말베.
And then when we look at the degrees of non-virtuous activity, if there is the greatest degree, if all 3 factors are present to complete the greatest degree of non-virtuous activity, it gives rise to a rebirth in the hell realm. If only 2 factors are present, it gives rise to a rebirth into a hungry ghost realm. And if only 1 is present, it gives rise to rebirth in an animal realm. So we see how these distinctions are also made among the completion of an action or an activity.
세자거든에 로바다 말로부거니 그걸로 랑고 거진다 따근 거진도 어때 원년 주지 메누다네 쿠시다게 네 아마글라다 콜라르마도 시다시시 메저보데 디바 총아이상 돈을 지내지로다.
So we see in the story of Manakapila, where he insulted the community of learners and non-learners in 18 different ways, and we see that his result wasn't as great as one would imagine. He was born as an animal and was not born in the hell realm because the factors were not all present for that type of rebirth or that propulsion, if you will. The mother was the one who influenced him and had the motivation to do this. So it wasn't his motivation and it wasn't his desire to insult this community. So the factors weren't all present, and this is why he was not born in the lowest realm. He was born as an animal. So we see the different factors that are present as far as completion of action.
So
the mother who had the worst motivation, the Gulung Ducha, the worst motivation, was born into the hell realm because she instructed her son to do this. Kong Triwa Yure.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Is there a karmic distinction between conceptualizing the action, thinking of the action of killing one's father, and having the genuine intention? Because they both exist as thought, but one seems to be more with words.
Kong Triwa de. The sansa nga tsu sanlo dan sempa chipa. Gangisin sansa nga tsu the nge paba nga segu. Gangisin nga the kon the katsapo nga lason. Yene yo mare. Dene the chi. Then nipa nga nge pala segare. nge the kong nge paba kong nga segre. The chapa iribe le chapa iribe. Gangisena the sanlo tambo joklan dan
다
drop.
내 바바 세기 있었나 kulung도 자로와 바바 nga segre samaje te chung neba chungu jire
Yene nika megewa yin.
치치도 뭐가 아이미 바바 nga segre samaje 뭐가 자 아이
Then the nga long lana the nge papa.
지지나 데 고아테 디바테 충사 말베테
So Rinpoche is saying that if he's not certainly answering this, but he's saying he thinks that there would be a smaller amount of non-virtue, certainly, if the intention wasn't to actually kill. I said, if you get angry sometime and I think to myself, man, I would love to kill my father, and I don't really intend on carrying that deed out, but I think about it. I gave him that example. And then the next example was, I posit, that's my father, right there. I've identified him as my father, and I'm going to kill him. Those are the two distinctions. And Rinpoche said there would be, he thinks, lesser of a negativity in the thinking. Initially said, is it non-virtue or not? And then said yes, and then said lesser than the other. So that was the series of answer. But yes, non-virtue, in thinking of the anger that arises, because the anger and so forth that arose. Yes? Stasha Triwa.
야 오케이
Then Ngatsu Dutsusa.
야
I've seen in some, I don't know where, but gossip also translated as senseless talk. So would be reciting Dharma or saying anything virtuous be abandonment of gossip?
Say it again.
Going like to the speech, your virtue of the speech.
The Nga Gewa.
나 이거 가졌어
I don't know.
Not the. So is it, if you're doing mantras, are you abandoning gossip? The Zonga Dama, then the Nga Gewa Pandue. Nga Zun Tama.
Zuma
Nga Che.
꼴롱 시치를 이제 말도 도서관 만다 말보다 종아도 전화 대다 오면은 마음에서 와서 개바 지트게 되버다서 그렇다 이디 다zen이야 백 감와지 하도 누가 좀 있어
The Zun Tama Tsitu Nga Che. Then the Gyawa. The Kandun Dan Nga Che the Gyawa yin.
아
The Nga Che Pami Tsutrim Yimba. The Kandun Chena.
지나는 같이 보면 저기 같이 보면 저기 단는 같이 지금 맨 야바제나 저리를 그러다 간을 지나려고 하고
So if you are actively saying, I am abandoning gossiping, you're abandoning gossiping. If you're just reciting a prayer, you aren't actively abandoning gossiping. So we will conclude there. Thank you, everyone. Concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure land. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the three times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All-powerful Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Rinpoche, upholder of scriptural and realizational doctrines, the spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great philosophical texts with exceptional wisdom and perseverance. Geshe Rinpoche Gutsi Shabi Denrala. Matsu